If you haven't seen the news lately, the public is in an outrage over the FBI's conclusion of their investigation of Jeffrey Epstein, where they found that he indeed died by suicide and that there is no so-called client list. The findings of the investigation were released to Axios on July 6, 2025. In the opening to the article, they state, President Trump's Justice Department and FBI have concluded they have no evidence that convicted sex offender and disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein blackmailed powerful figures, kept a client list, or was murdered, according to a memo detailing the findings obtained by Axios. The conclusion to this investigation upset many conspiracy theorists in the public who believed in three main things. 1. That Epstein was trafficking young girls and providing them to celebrities. 2. That he would record these interactions so that he could blackmail said celebrities. And 3. That he was murdered in his jail cell as a result of threatening high-profile individuals with blackmail. In fact, both the director and deputy director of the FBI, Dan Bongino and Kash Patel, believed in these conspiracy theories prior to joining the FBI under Trump's administration. However, they have since changed their tune, as it seems that the evidence they were looking for simply doesn't exist. On July 12th, Patel confirmed this by tweeting the following: "The conspiracy theories just aren't true. Never have been. It's an honor to serve the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and I'll continue to do so for as long as he calls on me." So it's clear that from the FBI and the Trump administration's perspective, the conspiracy theories simply aren't true and the case can be put to bed. And if we look at all the evidence we have, that seems to be the case. So why is the public in an uproar over this? It seems that the public was led in part by the thrill of the conspiracy as well as mob mentality, as many of the people who believe that Epstein didn't kill himself likely don't know anything about the circumstances of his death. They also wouldn't be able to point to a source as to why they believe that Epstein trafficked young girls and then provided them to high-profile individuals, later threatening to blackmail them with tapes of them interacting with said high-profile individuals. However, aspects of these ideas do have a small basis in reality that the public has exaggerated, some of which I'll explain later. Another reason why the public wanted to believe this conspiracy theory was because of propagation of the idea by members of the Trump admin, as well as a poor handling of the information by Attorney General Pam Bondi. Pam Bondi made the mistake of hyping up the release of the Epstein files, making a spectacle of it by giving information to conservative influencers back in February, if you remember that, in addition to implying that the Epstein client list was on her desk in an interview. In fact, it seems Dan Bongino had such an issue with the way that Pam Bondi disseminated the information regarding the Epstein case that he reportedly has threatened to resign. One major oversight in the release of the FBI's findings is the release of what they refer to as raw, unedited footage of outside the cell where Epstein was held. Controversy has erupted due to a 1-minute gap in the video from 11:59 p.m. to 12 a.m. Pam Bondi would later explain after the backlash that the prison security system has a glitch that causes the cameras to reset at 11:59 p.m. and start recording again at 12 a.m. Another controversy resulted when Wired reported that the footage was likely processed in Adobe Premiere, leading people to speculate about the credibility of the footage. However, what likely happened is that the security footage is released by date and somebody simply combined the two clips in the editor prior to releasing the full clip together. So here are the facts about Jeffrey Epstein. We know he solicited women for prostitution. We know some of these women would be underage. We know he mingled a lot with high-profile individuals. We know that many of these individuals visited the so-called Epstein Island. We know that Epstein made a whole career out of connections with high-profile individuals, and many people have even described him as charismatic. We know that at least one woman, Virginia Roberts, claims that Epstein forced her to have sex with powerful friends of Epstein, including hedge fund manager Glenn Dubin, attorney Alan Dershowitz, politician Bill Richardson, scientist Marvin Minsky, lawyer George J. Mitchell, and modeling agent Jean-Luc Brunel. However, none of these men have ever been found guilty, and many of the men, if not all, deny the allegations. We know that Epstein had cameras set up in his homes, particularly on the account of alleged victim Maria Farmer, who said that Epstein had a camera set up to view beds and toilets from a so-called media room. Now, here's the things that we don't have evidence for. We don't have evidence that Epstein recorded sexual encounters between minors and high-profile individuals and later used that to blackmail them. We don't have evidence that any of the people who went to Epstein's island ever interacted with underage women. We don't have any evidence that people in Epstein's extensive contact list were involved in or a part of his sex trafficking schemes. We have no evidence that Epstein was murdered in his jail cell while under arrest for sex trafficking charges. And finally, there is no evidence that Epstein held a so-called client list of people who bought or paid for services from women that Epstein trafficked. Epstein was a sex trafficker and also happened to work as a financier and had a lot of connections to a lot of noteworthy people. These are two sides of Epstein that, while sometimes overlapping, often did not interact with each other. Yes, Epstein held sex trafficking victims on his island, which celebrities tended to visit. However, that doesn't mean that the people visiting the island necessarily knew that the women on the island were sex trafficking victims of Epstein. Nor do we know how much interaction people visiting the island had with these women, if any. So as far as we know, Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide in his cell on August 10th, 2019, and there is no evidence for the existence of an Epstein client list.